All right, it's time. Talafalava, Bulavinaka, Maloelele, Kana, Fakalofalayatu, Yakwe, Kasalalea. If I miss any, welcome from the Pacific, my apologies. But I just want to again to welcome you into the Pacific Learning Partnership for Environmental and Social Sustainability. This is a continuation from our second regional training that started yesterday, and it'll go right up till December. So I just want to thank everybody. Yes, again, I can see from the list that many of you are the same that joined in. So welcome back. For those who are new, welcome to this regional training that we've been doing the last year or so under the partnership between the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, which is SPREP, the World Bank, ADB, and the University of the South Pacific. Yesterday we had an excellent start with the GIS in EIA, and we had excellent trainers provided from SPREP. And today we have another excellent presenter and trainer provided by SPREP by way of Sydney. I think linking in is Dr. Gregory Barbara. Many of you know Gregory Barbara, and I'm pretty sure that he does not need any introduction. So today's module is module 10. And it's titled Scoping for EIA. We will attempt to answer two questions. The first is how to prepare responsible terms of reference for EIA studies. And secondly, providing you with guidance tips on the selection and management of consultants. Before I start, I want to acknowledge the presence of the Acting Director of Environmental Monitoring Governance in SPREP, Ratu Jobeta Manetivalu, and I also want to acknowledge my team leader, Ms. Rachel Marburg, who joins us from Sydney, from her home in Sydney. Welcome. Like I said yesterday, every topic that we've designed from the evaluation, there is a narrative behind it, underpinning that topic. And so I'll read again out what that is and give you an understanding why we've designed this topic for today. So, EIA regulatory agencies in the Pacific often request capacity building support for developing terms of reference for EIA studies. In most cases, the quality of the EIA report is directly influenced by the constraints of limited qualified and experienced professionals to implement an effective EIA process. So while screening applications for development consent is a critical starting point, countries do apply different approaches with various struggle. However, both experience and documented requests to SPREP have shown that many EIA regulators across the Pacific region are requesting assistance for preparing terms of reference for EIA consultants, including the structure and format of the EIA report to be aligned with best practice in the region, and best practice meaning the SPREP regional EIA guidelines that we are promoting in the PLP partnership. Now, to address this, this training, this module number 10 will target improvement of your knowledge and skills of staff across EIA regulators and potentially consultants from their private sectors who are engaged to prepare EIA studies. We have about 3 learning objectives, and we hopefully at the end of this, we will introduce you participants to the key steps of preparing terms of reference for a consultant to carry out an EIA study. We will hopefully explore the usefulness of adopting SPREP's EIA report template. And finally, providing advice on how to select consultants with the right set of skills and experience, including managing contracts throughout the EIA process. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Barbara. But just before I do that, please use the chat box or the raise your hand. It'd be great to have folks join in with their cameras to ask questions, and then we'll respond to that. So, Dr. Barbara, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mai, and yeah, my pillow, you're looking good there, backing up here. I'm actually in Brisbane in quarantine, but yeah, okay, Sydney, Brisbane, it's all good. Thank you everyone for joining us today. As my pillow has explained, we're going to have 3 main objectives that we're going to look at. The first one is basically what is scoping and how to do it, the basics of it. We're going to go hopefully my other panelists will join in and we'll explain more about selecting the right type of consultant team for the scoping of for your project, because that's a critical element here. Often, even if you get the scoping right, if you get the wrong consultant in, the EIA is not going to be very good. So bear with me for those of you who know a lot about scoping and have gone through some sort of scoping capacity building that we've done before. This may seem all same or very familiar to you, but for those of you who haven't, hopefully you pick some stuff up, but we will be expanding upon it and we're going to be having some talanoas as we go through. So just bear with me while I load up my slides. Okay. So, right. If you could just let me know if you can all see those. I'll just take that down. Can everybody see my slides? Just a thumbs up or something. Yep, good. That's all being seen on the screen. Yeah, apologies if sometimes when we go through slides that if you've got your minimize the video feed if it's obscuring any of the text or any of the information on the slide, or dragging the video feed to a corner of the slides that it's so it doesn't obscure any of the information. Okay, without further ado, I'll launch into the presentation. So this is module 10, scope or environmental impact assessment. Is what is scoping and
Hey, Greg, sorry, we're experiencing some sort of static from your side. So it's affecting the flow of your explanation. All right, so I think Greg is trying to reconnect online. If you can just give him a few seconds, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully he'll manage to get on. Is Greg on? Just bear with us. I think he's trying to probably connect to Wi-Fi. He's beaming in live from Brisbane. So he should be on soon. While we're waiting for Greg to jump in, could I just sort of have a few of you guys sort of click on the hand button just to see how many of you are actually in a position that is implementing, that is preparing terms of reference for EIA. Can you put on your video camera while we wait for Greg, so we can just have a bit of a discussion? Oh, nice. So just have your videos click on. Be nice to see all your lovely faces. Perhaps. Hi everybody. It's very lovely. Wow. Yesterday we had about 60. So right now I can see we have about 50. So hopefully we've got an extra 10 or 11, even if it's just one more just to get us over the 60 mark. That'll be great. You know, this is we're competing from one session to another. And so I think we might need to talk to ask SPREP and World Bank to come up with some sort of a certificate on the best module with the highest participation. All right. So how many of you guys actually are doing EIA, preparing in terms of reference for EIA? Maybe you could unmute and just sort of have a discussion while we wait for Greg. It's really good to sort of learn a bit more about you. This is these sort of things happen. You guys are willing to share your thoughts about about the experiences you confront with developing terms of reference for EIA.
Hi, Mia Pello. Would it be okay if I just
start
a conversation
Rachel,
here?
jump in.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. Really appreciate you joining again. It's great to see so many faces. I haven't been to the Pacific for, well, too long now, and I'm really missing all the faces and the people in the Pacific. So thanks for having your cameras on. Just a really short reflection on terms of reference to reiterate, I think, what Greg was starting to say, and perhaps the experience that many of you have. It takes a lot longer than you think, and it's really important to do that thinking for terms of reference for an impact assessment, or in fact anything, simply because that starts the process. It defines the effort. It makes people think about key issues. It makes you think about the skills you need to do this work. It makes you think about the relationship between different parts of a project or a program or a study. And it makes you understand the kinds of questions that you have when you're trying to do this. And remember that you want good outcomes. The end result here is not just that you have fulfilled your terms of reference or that you have a report, but you're really trying to understand the answers to questions that you're seeking through this process. And this is a really important step in doing this. So it really does deserve some thinking and a bit of attention right up the front. And I can tell you from my own experience that it's very easy to take a generic terms of reference, or one that you've used before, or one that somebody like me has sent you from the bank, and to think that that's okay, that's good enough, or that, that will do because of course you're busy and it's an easy thing to do to use something before. But it always needs tailoring. Putting that thought in from the scoping and that terms of reference and that initial stage, how you think about these questions, is really, really important. And not every scoping exercise will be the same. It won't involve the same people or the same issues or the same topics. It really will depend on what you're building, what you're doing, where you are, and who is around you. What is the context you're working in? So I would just really reiterate what Greg was saying, that it's a really important process, and it really helps set up the whole rest of your program as you go forward. So I'll stop. Happy to hand over to somebody else to share their thoughts. Thanks. Mia Pello, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Rachel. That was excellent. Good comment. Anybody else wishes to share their thoughts about the EIA, the issues or that you confront with preparing EIA terms of reference? Perhaps everybody's a bit shy at the beginning. Okay. Well, I mean, I just want to also chime in because, and I think the reason why a lot of folks have pointed to this issue is because, you know, in many cases, the quality of the EIA report and every other instruments that come after that, the monitoring, the management plans that come after that, are uniquely tied in with how well you prepare terms of reference. And like Rachel mentioned, it's sort of like a starting point where you pause and reflect. And you really, it's not meant to, in my view, and from my own experience, not meant to be very quick. There is a process in itself, and it's meant to really flesh out, not just to identify, but really flesh out the sort of issues in terms of risks and impacts that's going to be associated with that particular development proposal that you've been asked to review, you know? And so like every project is different in scale and scope. And of course, you know, every terms of references are not exactly the same from one project or another. But I do want to point out particularly one of the most important things that I find is that you need to have the right set of talent, the right set of people with the experience and the qualifications to be a part of that process. So it's not just when you have to review an EIA report that you need to bring folks in to review the actual report. But there is also merit to suggest that when you're preparing a terms of reference, you also need the right set of expertise to be there to provide their conditions and input into the terms of reference. So that's also a and once you've done that, then it's easy to it flows rightly from that point, so that you've covered everything. And as regulators, we have to exercise due diligence and ethical practices to ensure that when we ask a developer to adhere to a specific terms of reference, what you're doing is you're covering all a broad range of issues that the government is mandated to regulate as part of their role, and also inherent in that is there's a responsibility that we borne onto the developers themselves, so that we do not have too much back and forth. Because every time you do that, because you do not design the terms of reference properly, a developer has to incur costs, because that's something that wasn't discovered. And so once you have a proper team to develop a terms of reference, you know, I mean, you're not going to cover everything under the sun, obviously, but you should know the key areas that a particular proposal, the key areas in environment, the key areas in social, in society, the key areas that would be, you know, affected by a particular proposal. So I think this is, and I think this is why many of you have requested for this training to occur. We did touch a lot on scoping in the first round last year. And so I think, you know, there is still merit to continue that conversation today. Now, let me go back and ask, is Dr. Barbara on board? Or if that's not the case, I'd like to suggest if we could have all the cameras. Yesterday, we did not take a photo. And that's the beautiful thing about Zoom, is we can actually have all of your beautiful faces online, and then we can take a photo, because after this, then we have a press release. And like me, I need to have evidence that I'm here. So it'd be great to have a photo. Have a photo. So please turn on your cameras, and we'll get Ivan. And hopefully that's enough time for us to regroup. Yeah. So please, we've got about 53 participants. So I'm expecting 53 videos to be turned on, if you don't mind. Oh, great. Ivan, would you like to take a photo? I have to stand there and wait.
You want to follow the camera?
Huh?
You want to work the camera as well?
Yeah, the camera. So do we just stand right next to the?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll just stand right next to the.
Yes.
All right. Next to that.
That's the best one.
Let's stand here.
Yes.
Here. And Dr. and I can.
One more. One more. Smile.
Yes, smile.
All right. Is it? You know, just I'll give Jope 5 minutes. But one more activity to fill in the gap. I'll name the country and please put on your microphone to say, you know, and say that you're from that country. I want to see where you're joining in from very quickly. Papua New Guinea.
Hi.
All right, we got Papua New Guinea present. How about Solomon Islands? Nice.
Just okay.
Samoa?
Bula, SPREP.
Bula.
Oh, okay, Fiji, jump in, Fiji.
Fiji, Bula.
All right. Okay. Well, it looks like everybody from the region is here, so that's great. All right, let's move. Let's get on with the show. So Jope will step in at the moment while we have Greg trying to link in, and we'll continue on. Thanks for your patience and my apologies for the technical glitches. These things happen, but the show must go on. All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Rachel, for your earlier remarks on setting the scene for this particular module. And colleagues, I will be stepping in for Dr. Barbara this morning. And yes, my name is Jope, and I'm currently managing the Environment Monitoring Governance Program for SPREP. And it is so good to see lots of familiar faces. And please, colleagues, we are all in this together, and please jump in to contribute to this important item, to share your experience and your know-how on how we can improve scoping in the area of environment impact assessment. And it is module 10. And please bear with me, and I'll be going through this slide that was prepared by Craig. And jump in, as I said, jump in to contribute to the discussion. And the question that Craig started off with is, what is scoping? What is scoping? And as it reads, it is the stage whereby the regulator identifies and highlights the major impacts of the proposed development. Colleagues, while working here in the Pacific region, we tend to observe that there are some countries that are very good in setting up their governance system, to include scoping as an important step of the whole EIA process. But for some, they are getting there. And please, in my understanding of the general process of EIA, this is an important step for the whole EIA process. In most jurisdictions, scoping is legislated. Yes, I talked about that earlier on. And when the application is screened, after the application is screened, then it is scoped. It is scoped. And here on this slide, we have our colleague from the Solomon Islands in one of our EIA training held in the Solomon Islands. And this is, if I'm correct, this is part of the EIA training for them to understand the approval process between the regulated EIA process and other approval agencies, such as mining and forestry. This particular training, it is focused on mining. So yes, when we talk about the scoping in the EIA process, it comes into play after the project has been screened. Example, scoping regulations. Yes, under into value, the 2017 EIA regulation, it clearly states the need to undertake a scoping. And not only into value, we have the in FSM YAP Part 3 of the regulation, and also in my experience working in Fiji, and also while working with the Planning and Urban Management Agency of Samoa, they are considering and looking at scoping as an important step of the EIA process. So how do you carry out scoping? Why scoping is important? It is mainly to identify the main issues to be addressed by an EIA. And exactly to know the locations and existing data sources. This was discussed at length, and there were lots of interest in GIS yesterday. So there was a mention of this particular process, even using GIS tool as part of the scoping. And it also to determine what information needs to be collected from baseline studies and the methodology that should be used to evaluate their significance. And colleagues, again, sharing my experience on scoping in my term as an EIA regulator. Sometimes for environment agencies, they are always worried about them taking the task alone. But no, that should not be the case. When we are doing scoping, and again, this point was raised yesterday, it should be a collective commitment, collective contribution, not only of the environment agency, but other sectors such as other regulatory agencies such as mining, forestry, water, transport, and even colleagues, consultants and developers in some countries, they are all included in the scoping exercise. And while undertaking scoping, colleagues, be sure to consider both positive and negative issues and impacts that the EIS needs to address. May I talk more on this particular bullet point? It is very, very important. Some of the weaknesses we notice in some of our member countries because they didn't do scoping, and there is no terms of reference when it comes to addressing the content of the EIS. There is no boundary to govern their work in the area of review of that particular EIS report. So it is vital why scoping is important to identify positive and negative issues. Second bullet point, who are the key stakeholders directly affected or interested people, groups, public, government agencies, industries? Very, very important, colleagues, very, very important. We as environment or regulatory agency responsible for a particular development, or if you represent the department or environment agency regulating the EIA process, it is important that you consult with the key stakeholders so that they will be involved in the initial stage when this project is screened and scoped. Because come a time when the terms of reference is developed, they will also need to input their opinion, their comments in the terms of reference, because at a later stage, they will need to review the EIA report. Bullet point number 3, consideration of relevant legislation, policies, strategies, and multilateral agreements, and link to the EIA process with broader scale planning. Colleagues and representatives of the various agencies and countries, this is very, very important. When undertaking scoping, we must consider existing relevant legislation. Yesterday, there was a good scenario said yesterday about gravel extraction. When we talk about gravel extraction in Fiji, we talk about the EIA regulatory agency. We talk about the the lands department. We talk about the minerals department. We talk about the forestry department. So it is very, very important that all these sectors have their own mandate in enforcing the legislation within this environment. So that is very, very important, colleagues, that consideration must be applied to this relevant legislation. Thank you. So what does it involve, colleagues? What does it involve? Development of terms of reference that outline the required format and content of an EIS. It's been observed that for some member countries, it is part of their regulation that it has the outline, the required format or content of an EIS. Some they refer to as that is the terms of reference. Yes, to some extent, yes. But we need more detailed information that needs to be included in the framework or outline so that it reveals the impact of that development on that particular location. Again, primarily a desk-based exercise, but important to be familiar with the development location and local issues. Colleagues, again, allow me to further discuss this particular bullet point. And when receiving a particular application, it is very, very important for EIA regulatory managers to mobilize their team in understanding the location, the development itself, and also the location. That is why critical system thinking must be applied. And even at some stage, you can do your own internal analysis to see what are the positive impacts, what are the negative impacts before you go and do validation on the ground. And yes, colleagues, again, this point was shared by our GIS ladies yesterday, the importance of being familiar with development location. There was a good scenario too shared yesterday, where the forestry department has a clear map outline of the Ramsar site, in Fiji, where it triggered the decision to relook at adjusting the boundary by the developer. So colleagues, on bullet point number 3, so you can take a site visit if you need to get a clearer picture. May I again elaborate more on this? Colleagues, for some countries in the Pacific region, when they talk about scoping, they have provisions that allows the developer to support the agencies in taking site visit, so that a clear terms of reference and understanding and validation of what's written in the application is there on the ground. Critical thinking. What is this? Critical thinking, what is this? So know the site and its history to understand its risk and potential impacts from the development. Very, very important. Again, when working as a team for regulatory agency, please, may we kindly advise that you are not working there alone. There are agencies that are there to support you in understanding and knowing the location in which a particular proposal is planned to be made. And thank you to the ladies yesterday about addressing the importance of scoping within the various scenarios they presented. Key issues with doing it right. Key issues with doing it right. There is usually a time constraint from receiving an application screening to determine an EIA is needed, then scoping the TOR. Primarily, a desk-based exercise, but important to be familiar with the location and local issues. Evaluating the development size, features, fiscal location, and land status, social cultural settings, relevant legal policies. Is it a prescribed development? Considering potential impacts, positive and negative. Colleagues, if I may share my experience while working as an EIA regulator, but in some instances, in my experience, some concepts are redesigned because of the importance of this particular step of the process called scoping. And also some development are changed, the location of that particular development are relooked at, finding other alternatives when scoping is properly carried out. Considering the potential impacts, are they likely to be significant? Do they need further investigation? So these are the questions. These are the questions that needed to be asked by the team when they are developing the content of the terms of reference in this particular step called scoping. Will they require management? Yes. Very, very important, colleagues. One of the items that was observed or we found out from our participants in the last meeting, and also it's raised in our discussion while planning through these training modules, is that the importance of management of a particular development. With this specifically, may I flag at this time is the importance of understanding and designing proper construction and operational environment management plans. Things to check, colleagues. As the site selection presented alternatives, yeah, I talked about this. And this was also came up in the discussion yesterday on the GIS presentation. Are there actions to anticipate and avoid impacts on biodiversity and ecosystem services? Yes, very, very important. And where avoidance is not possible, do they minimize? And where impacts occur, is there a possibility to restore? Do significant residual impacts remain? I think for this one, a good example again, I would like to reflect on the Ramsar site in Fiji, where it crossed the boundary and the decision is they must work according to what's the legal boundary of the Ramsar site. So for that one, they have to avoid reaching or moving into the Ramsar site. So when scoping, colleagues, always remember to take a precautionary approach. Ask questions when things are unclear or vague. Request further information, clarification, or verification. Very, very important, colleagues. Very, very important. Sometimes when a scoping is completed, a scoping field visit or field visit is completed, we can always have time to revisit again what we saw and create some discussions on what is really necessary to be found out in the EIA study that has to be undertaken by the developer or the EIA consultant. Then focus the TOR. Once this discussion is clear, then your TOR or EIA terms of reference will be clear. Should be led by regulator. Example, Environment Conservation Division in the Solomon Islands, in Samoa, the EPA, NEP, the EPC in Vanuatu, DOE in Tuvalu, etc. But colleagues, and it's very interesting that for some of our member countries, they do scoping, but the idea of developing a clear terms of reference is something that needs to be added into their policy or existing regulation. But there's an excellent work done by all these environment agencies in undertaking this particular step of the EIA process. Assistance can be provided by the applicant or consultants with specialist knowledge. And for some of our member countries, thank you to you for always using SPREP in providing support to your respective environment agencies in developing or providing assistance or contribution to terms of reference of some particular developments that they are interested in or they are screening. Consultation can be undertaken with government agencies and general public to help identify issues and impact. Colleagues, very, very important. Sometimes in the EIA process, there is a separate step which is called public consultation or yes, community consultation. But in the scoping step alone, colleagues, yes, public consultation is an important activity to be undertaken because there are lots of knowledge and observations that are done by, that are known by the public that we need to know as regulators. Important to note, regional organizations such as SPREP can also help with the development of the terms of reference. May I also add at this juncture that in some countries, they have provisions in their regulation identifying the various crop agencies and institutions that can help them in this particular step or this particular process called scoping. That is only to do with development of terms of reference. Importance of terms of reference. We need a clear terms of reference so that the applicant understand which issues and impacts they need to focus on in the EIA studies and report. Very, very important, colleagues. Very, very important. Upon completion of the studies and submission of EIA report, the regulator can cross-check terms of reference if the report is adequate. Colleagues, again, in some countries, there is provision in their EIA regulation that when the developer submit a terms of an EIA report, the approved terms of reference must be attached as an annex to that EIA report, so that the regulator can cross-check the terms of reference with a copy they have, and this will allow proper review of the report according to the terms of reference approved. Regulator and project has a point of reference if a legal challenge is made, especially after a development commences. Colleagues, if a TOR are not well prepared, an EIA can miss important information or be cluttered with unnecessary details. Colleagues, while working at SPREP and working with some of our member countries, it's good that this area is developing very, very quickly, especially the area of terms of reference. And it's helping the countries now in understanding the importance of this because it helps them in getting the necessary information that is needed for a particular development. SPREP recommends TOR minimum requirements. Yes, if we look into these minimum requirements, most of these are reflected in most EIA regulation in the countries. And if we look through this list, non-technical summary is always an important part of an EIA report and also should be reflected as part of the terms of reference. Because due to the technical component or content of the EIA report, it needs to be simplified so that it is understood by the local communities. It must have an introduction, a background information, details of the proponent or developer, details of specialist consultants who prepare EIS, legal requirements and study area, scope of work to be conducted during the study, flexibility with negotiation, description and purpose of action, alternatives including the proposed action, affected environment, environmental consequences, list of preparers and appendices, if any. So this is just a minimum requirement. As I said a while ago, there are lots of other specific details that can be included under these minimum requirements to make the report more informative and allows better decision to be made. Colleagues, the SPREP regional guidelines also provide a toolkit for developing a terms of reference. And these details, these minimum requirements, as summarized on the slide, the details are contained in the SPREP regional guidelines, as you can find in the SPREP website. Tool 2, terms of reference template, page 43 of the guidelines. it has a generic terms of reference template to assist EIA officers. Colleagues, we've been sharing this with some of our member countries, and they found it very, very useful. They found it very, very useful because it guides the member countries on what they need to understand, and also what they need to observe when undertaking a scoping. And your preparation should be guided by countries, laws, etc., and other applicable policies, regulations, or legislations. Terms of reference are to be project specific, not only listing general topics, but also include specific information requests related to the project, anticipated impacts. Very, very important. Yes, this is something that is being standing out in the presentation today about the specific information. Colleagues, why we are emphasizing this point, because in some instances, when EI reports are fully completed, we then pick up some very, very important information or issue or area that needs to be provided in the report to assist in the decision making. So that is why, colleagues, when you look at the whole process of scoping, the importance of engaging a wider stakeholder, important stakeholder in this process. Colleagues, that is a run-through of the slides prepared by Dr. Craig, and I do hope I'm helpful in making you understand the importance. Oh, Craig, please, you're back online, mate.
Vinaka Jope. No, you did a great job. I came in about partway through that. Really sorry I had a systems crash on the laptop, but I'm really glad you were able to jump in and cover for me in my absence.
Please,
So,
while you are online now, please,
yes.
you can revisit and continue with the Talanoa. I just went through the slides and
Yes, no, yep.
that with the approval of Mr. Moderator.
Yes, of course.
Thank
Please
you.
go ahead, my man.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mai.
It's good to see you.
So, so yeah, thank you, Jope, for stepping in my absence. Yeah, so hopefully our slides gave you a bit of an overview of why you need to do a scoping and how it's important to do it. So the key elements that you need to put in now, although we didn't go into specific project examples, although I did hear Jope provide some examples, particularly referring to yesterday's module on GIS. We will talk about that during the Talanoa. Hopefully my other panelists are online too, and they'll be able to provide some examples from ADB as well as USP's experience. Yeah, the key element is when you're doing your scoping, we do have a template that SPREP provides. You look at what is relevant to your project. So if the legislation or the templates that you're given when you're drafting up your scope of works says something about marine studies, check, because it may not actually be relevant to your project. If it's not relevant, you don't have to worry about doing marine studies. For instance, if you're up in the Highlands and you're doing some logging clearance, unless you anticipate there are going to be huge amounts of runoff going into the river and impacting on a reef that's nearby, then you're unlikely to need to go out there and do hydrographic surveys. You might need to do some benthic habitat surveys to see if there's potential for smothering, but you're unlikely to do all the other surveys that are required for a marine project. Likewise, if you're a marine project, you're unlikely to have to do lots of terrestrial studies. So be clear on what your project scope of works is going to require, because as Jope said, you don't want to clutter your EIS with a whole heap of studies that were not needed. Okay, so we can see there's a few comments that have come in during the presentation. I might hand over to our moderator to take us through those to start off the Talanoa.
Right, Mike. Thanks. I've got a few questions. I'll try and read it. So we've got a question from Keleko Leo Dominico. So the question is, can an EIA consultant on behalf of the proponent challenge the terms of reference issued by the approving authority as you mentioned on one of the slides, that the terms of reference should be clear and precise in order all necessary information should be captured in the EIA report and avoid unnecessary information. That's an excellent question, Kerekolio. So I'll sort of go around the table, see if anybody has any sort of response to that. Greg, do you want to have a first shot at that one?
Yeah, sure. It depends on your jurisdiction on the process that you do that, but yeah, you can do that. In my previous life as a consultant and developing up EIAs, you can go back. I wouldn't call it challenge the approving authority, but you can go back for clarification on the TOR. Normally you do that through the proponent, or the proponent has to give you specific authority to do that. The consultant, yeah, that's a little bit tricky, that one, in regards to when you're allowed to actually do that. So you'd have to be given explicit approval from the proponent to go back and seek clarification. Challenging the TOR is, that's more of the proponent's territory, but the consultant can definitely advise that this TOR seems a little unclear. We need some further clarification.
All right. Any other comments to add on to that?
Thank you, Craig, and may I say thank you very much, Mr. Kerekolio. This is an excellent question indeed. It is really indeed an excellent question. And yes, similar to Craig, in my past experience working as an EIA regulator, in some instances, the consultant on behalf of developer questioned why some studies are reflected in the TOR. And we as regulatory agencies and supporting agencies and stakeholders must be well versed. That's why it's really important. To do a desktop analysis, understanding of that particular development. When we are questioned in this instance, we have a proper reply, proper response to address that question. I've been through that, and yes, and that is why I raised in one of my discussion points that even the developer and the consultant can come and be part of the scoping exercise, so that we deal with issues on the ground before it's being put on paper. And before the terms of reference is finalized, it's circulated to all the scoping team for them to approve. And that's where the question, or say, using the term being raised, challenged. But yeah, that is how this system works in my experience. Thanks.
Hey, Nick, I think you have a comment, so I'll come back. Perhaps you can put on your video before that. I would say that, that word challenge, it's really sort of focusing on whether the consultant or the proponent does not like a particular condition placed on the terms of reference, a particular activity that's on terms of reference. And in that case, it's really sitting down with the regulator and asking for clarification why that particular clause has been put into the terms of reference, given that the project is this and that and this and that. So the scale and scope of the project becomes very important. If it is a condition that is placed in the terms of reference mandated by law, that will be tricky, and that's something that will become compulsory and mandatory. And so the regulator would just sort of respond, that's the law. But if it's sort of activities, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? It's the regulator's responsibility to explain and clarify what that is. And then perhaps, through that conversations, you're able to come to a consensus. Nick, can I have you come online and offer? I see you have a comment, best to verbalize it from Muli. Hi, Nick from the World Bank.
Bula Anaka.
Bula.
How are you all?
Good, thanks.
Good. Sorry if I'm answering your questions for you, but just a few comments. To Kilakaleo's question, I think the TOR should always invite comments from the consultants. That's why we're going to consultants in the first place, to provide expertise. Invite that on the TOR. So as a normal practice. The question from James where he talks about uncertainties in EIAs. There's a section of the Tool 3 of the EIA guidelines, which talks about stating a level of confidence in the assessment. So that's where I would be inclined to incorporate that. Pello, I made some other comments, but I'm just getting some feedback. So let me sort out my audio and perhaps we can come back to those.
All right, thanks. Okay, so we got a comment, a question from James Taluasi, I think in the Solomons. How do you deal with uncertainties in EIAs? Any case studies? How can the developer deal with those deviations based on inaccuracy of prediction in the EIA process during implementation stage? Any takers? That's a very good question. I don't think, doing proper scoping is addressing should address uncertainties. You usually, where there is an uncertainty, you adopt the precautionary approach and that assume the risk is real and natural until it is proven otherwise. So that's really something, that's where the precautionary approach kicks in. Can you enlarge that, please? Yeah, so, and how can a developer deal with the deviations based on inaccuracy of deviations? Listen, James, I'm going to say sorry to put you on the spot. Can you come online and explain a bit more about what that is? That seems to be like a really good question, but provide a bit more context for our trainers to respond. Is that you, Jay? Can I get James Talwasi online? Please. Hello, James, are you there?
Hi.
Hi, James, can you put on
Hi,
your video? Hi, buddy. Hi, how are you? It's good to
I'm
see you.
good,
Man.
thanks.
How's Tina Hydro? All right, so you've got a really good question, but that question you have, how can the developer deal with those deviations based on inaccuracy of predictions? Can you explain a bit more about what that means?
I think just referring to like mostly in terms of scoping, to do with content and the extent of how to mitigate or the risks that involve in the project. What I'm referring to here is there will be some, if the there'll still be some inaccuracy of how we predict the possible mitigation measures for those when assessing the risk. So later on in the post-implementation, there are some issues that came about during the project implementation, which is normally we will refer back to the EIA. So that is where my question coming from. So how do we, deal with those inaccuracy of prediction during the EIA process?
Okay,
Like
so
it affects the implementation of the project.
Go ahead, Greg.
If I may, I think I understand your question there, James. So yeah, it's a very common problem, and it's an excellent question. So just let me summarize what you said, just to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. So your question relates to once the EIA has been completed, and then you've been given the expected outcomes, the expected mitigation, and the expected impacts from that project, and you're now commencing the project. How do you deal with deviation? So when you start actually on site and you're in the midst of construction, you discover that it's different to what the EIA had predicted.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So where that is a common one, especially when there's a lot of paucity of information when you're doing up the EIA, and then that happens a lot in the Pacific because we do lack a lot of data. So the scoping phase can help a little bit in by making the studies broad enough but focused on what you think are going to be the key problems or the key impacts and the key benefits of the project. Sometimes however what happens is the team becomes so focused on what they think the project's going to be, they kind of put the blinkers on and they don't take in account of all the other things that are going on site, because that's what the TOR said. And that comes down to scoping, understanding your location and the project risks and the wider context, and making sure it's refined. What you're talking about then is what happens then? How do you deal with that? So we're going to be dealing with that, I think, in module 14, when we talk about environmental monitoring and management plans. Now, this is the document that you develop alongside your EIA when you're doing your impact assessment, which is your, how do you monitor your project as you're developing it, and as it's running in an operation, and how do you manage your impacts, and how do you check and go back and have a feedback loop for correcting any actions on site. So perhaps you didn't accurately estimate the amount of rainfall and the amount of potential erosion that's going to come down on the site, and now you've got to figure out ways to deal with that. Well, that's what the EMP is about, and that's when you have the monitoring and management plan in place, and you have a feedback loop when you realize it's not performing the way it should be. You go back and you reassess, and you do a refinement of your mitigation plan. So hopefully that really briefly answered part of your question. I know it's a much more complicated question that you've asked, but hopefully we'll be able to address it a bit more in module 14. So yeah, what you're talking about is when the EIA doesn't reflect what you find when you're in the middle of construction and operation.
Thanks, Dr. Barbara. I'll hand over to Jopin. I'll probably chime in after.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you very much for the question, Wantok. And thank you, Jane, Craig, for your contribution. And if I read it, hear it correctly, you're talking about the changes that will take place when you're implementing the project. And yes, James, as a regulatory agency, one of the main conditions that they can put in place as part of the approval condition is the setting up of a monitoring committee to oversee the management, the implementation of the environment management plan as stated by Craig. So you asked the question how. That is how one way we can address that. Because, you know, nature keeps on changing. Sometimes our human thinking has its limitation, but there can be new things that coming in. And this can only be seen when the impact arises. So there is a way, that is one way in my experience of setting up environment committee to meet monthly or regularly, depending on the nature of the project. Because at the end of the day, if there is a new thing, new issue that comes up, the committee is there to address it, linking it to the existing sectors and existing legislation on how it can help with that new development. And again, James, that is an excellent one. That's something that needs to be considered by governments as part of their legislation requirement or regulation in addressing new issues or uncertainty. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Jopin. Just chiming in. So, James, I think if it's a development consent issue by an EIA regulator, the EIA regulator would define to you the monitoring program for your project, for your license. And through that monitoring program, there will be intervals for you to report back to the EIA regulators. That will be sort of something that using those intervals, that's where you take reviews and you add in new things or whatnot. So it's really, I think, and in terms of safeguards, project safeguards officer, again, that's the compliance, the monitoring for compliance function that you perform. You can't predict everything. Some things will pop up that we didn't predict. Don't worry about it. Document them properly and push it up to the chain and make sure that it's that all the approval levels for that document has been submitted, and then they will provide their responses, and make sure you document. I've got a comment from Nick. Nick, you want to come online? I think you have a comment there. It's pretty good.
Thanks, Pello. Yeah, look, I just wanted to give an example of how this can play out based on an experience in Sydney on a major construction project. It was a tunnel underneath the CBD in Sydney called the Cross City Tunnel, that some may know. During the course of the tunnel excavations on the western end of the tunnel, they uncovered an old sandstone wall, and it turned out to date from the early 19th century. So it was a heritage site that was unknown at the time of commencement of the project, and it was of significance, but it was right in the middle of where the tunnel portal was going to be, so it had to be removed. So what the response there was initially to contact the regulator, as Pello suggests, or Jope suggested, the Heritage Office, and what they resolved to do was to get a heritage advisor in, and then they carefully excavated the remains, and then they put them on public exhibition, if you like. So they allowed the public to come and view the historic remains, and they had the heritage advisor do a photographic and a written interpretation of them, and then they were removed. I can't recall if they were relocated or perhaps put in a museum somewhere, but these things happen. You uncover, literally, particularly when you're doing earthworks, you uncover things, and that's why we have for heritage, we have a chance finds procedure, because there literally is a chance that you may come across something. And in that instance, on that project in Sydney, the work stopped. So obviously the risk was that if they continued to excavate, they would destroy the relics. So that section of the project stopped for a period of about 4 weeks, I think. And that's just the way it goes, right? Now the contractor has recourse for a claim there, but these things arise, and we just, the nature of EIA, it's going to be imperfect, and we respond as best we can. Over.
Thank you. All right, let's continue with our presentation. There's a few comments, but I think we're pressed for time. Over to you, back to you, Greg, please, if you can take us through. Greg, you're on mute, buddy.
Sorry, I'm just scrolling through. Are there any actual new comments? Just looking. There's the one from Nick to everyone. What we got?
No, we're pressed for time. If it's all right with you, we can just continue on your slides, and then we'll come back and pick on that.
The slides, I think Jope actually wrapped up the slides. So yeah, the slides were just really to cover early on and then to launch into the Talanoa. So I was anticipating, I don't know if Jean's online. She was going to be talking about some case studies, but if she's not, I'm really glad that Nick's here instead. So we can hear about the World Bank projects and our experiences. Excellent example, by the way, Nick, with regards to the chance finds. And I mean, other parts of the world, in Europe and always in Rome, they basically, it's basically it's a standard procedure. You know you're going to hit something when you're digging through the ground. So yeah, they stop works, they photograph, they document everything. It gets categorized off to a museum if it can't be safely relocated, or they can't and it's like that for.
Thanks, Greg. Listen, my apologies. We're experiencing some technical sort of audio issues from Greg. Greg is in a hotel in Brisbane linking in, so perhaps that's where the connectivity issue is. But, you know, and we can make out what he's saying. So thanks a lot, Dr. Greg. Let's go on to the next question by Naomi Tor. How can a regulator ensure that the Environmental Monitoring Management Committee is always ready and available and will actively participate in a meeting on a particular development if the committee is not catered for under the Environment Act? Good question. Any takers? All right, we've got, hi, Nick, thanks. Nick's can jump in now.
Hello, I was going to say, provide catering,
Sure.
provide some morning tea, and maybe the committee members will come. I think, yeah, look, I think it's making sure that there's resources available and time available. If they're on the committee, that's a condition of their participation on the committee, that they have time available, and perhaps there's a stipend or something for them to participate. I mean, I think that's the way to go about it when you establish a committee, to set those ground rules rather than have the expectation down the track, because everyone's busy, right? So not sure if that's helpful.
The morning tea is always helpful. Listen, you know, it's every department had their own unique way of doing things. It varies across the region, but I think the answer would be, first of all, the commitment inside the department is there. Number two is that there's resources for the committee to support the committee's work. Some of these things like secretariat or paperwork support. Secondly, planning, ensuring that the committee is regularly meeting on a scheduled time frame, so that people can plan in their time. And this is particularly true if you're requesting staff from other ministries to join you. So it's really a planning and a commitment sort of a question, isn't it? Unfortunately, those sort of, and in some countries, the committees are actually are included in a policy or in a regulation or law, which means that it should take place more regularly. But that is really at the discretion of the EIA regulator to do that. So,
if I may,
please, Ratu.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And yes, that is again an excellent question by Neomai. Hi, Neomai, Noma, Pula to you, ma'am. And yes, excellent question. Well, I'll refer back to my experience. And as stated by the moderator, putting it as a condition is something that I always apply, and then drawing up a terms of reference and selecting the chair of the committee. And once that is formed, and the regulator always remind the chair that we are to meet on this so-and-so date, so that we can review and vet some of the necessary issue or area that needs to be addressed under the environment management plan. And one thing I noticed, why is it working well? Because if a particular agency is slow in that response, and that will develop the delay in that particular project. Then take, for example, if it is a government project, if it is a government initiated project, so all the committee members must be stand by and on alert to come and meet and address certain issues that needs to be addressed by the monitoring committee. So it's placed as a condition of approval. That is one area that I can share with you, Norma. Thank you. Yes, Craig.
Yes, Craig.
Bedaka Chope, Bedaka everyone. Thanks, Norma. Excellent question, as the other panelists have all said. Just thinking, and I know you're talking about if it's not mandated or if it's not legislated under the Environment Act in your own country. What I know we've done with Tuvalu, they upgraded their regulations for EIA, and in there they put a provision for activating what they called a task force, EIA task force or committee. And we helped them develop up a number of template letters, which they issued to the different ministries, to the to the different ministries to activate and request their participation in those committees. So you could do a similar thing where you have a template letter that you send off to the ministries to say you're going to create this advisory committee and that you're going to need their officers' participation. And that could form part of your planning and agreement when you're undertaking the EIA and review, just so that everybody knows that what's going to happen, and then you can then start the planning and scheduling, and at least advise them that you were going to call upon their services throughout that process, rather than it coming sort of out of the blue to them. Because as we all know, everybody in government has usually spinning multiple plates, doing lots of different projects and lots of different roles. You're an environmental officer, Norma, you know how many different things you're doing. So when you're dealing with the other ministries, it's just, maybe have a plan in place, request a formal letter to their supervisor, and requesting that you form this committee, and get your, send it up the chain, get your superior, get your director to issue it. So there's a formal line of communication, and the committee gets set up. Even if there isn't legislation, at least you can get an agreement going between the agencies. Did everybody hear that? Or did I drop audio again?
No, that's good. Do we have any other questions popping in? We've got I think. Okay. Now me and the door. Aminiasi, where's Aminiasi? Aminiasi, do you have a question? We could. We got Aminiasi that came online. No, okay. Got a final comment from Nick, I think. Now, under donor finance projects, we or you should ensure adequate budget and resources in the PMU, okay, in the design and supervision consult. Thank you very much, Nick, for that. Final call for any questions before we wrap up. If
it's just Mr. Moderator, Greg here.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Apologies, I don't think we probably really got into one of the other objectives of this, which was talking about selecting appropriate consultants. Maybe Nick can chime in here if he's still listening. There are processes within the donor banks for selecting the correct type of consultant for your project. But just like with scoping, understanding which studies need to be undertaken, you need to identify the appropriate consultant for the types of work you're going to be doing. So I know within the Pacific, we have a limited pool of consultants in many countries. And we have seen as a result of that we're getting biologists writing up geotech reports, or geologists doing social engagement. This, under normal circumstances, is not really appropriate. So when selecting your consultants, it's really important to try and look for the people with the right skill sets, the right qualifications to undertake the specific specialist studies, because ultimately you're relying on their advice to do a good EIA and to provide you with the appropriate mitigation measures.
Yeah, so just to from my side, it's when you're that's why it's very good to develop.
I'm just going to turn off my mic because I'm getting feedback.
So, the idea we've been talking about is how to prepare responsible terms of reference. So the word is responsible. What exactly does that mean? It means that whatever project application, can we have some, can we mute the, can you mute? Oh, thanks. So once you've developed a responsible terms of reference, you should be able to identify the key areas of expertise that are required to prepare the EIA report. So that's why there is that insistence for a multidisciplinary team to sort of convene and discuss what sort of areas that should be included in a terms of reference. And because that, then the developer will be able to identify their team or the right set of consultants to do the job. Like Greg said, if you got if you receive an EIA report, you must insist on the credentials. That report should highlight the credentials of those who prepared the report. Or even before that, discuss it in the beginning with the developer who is hiring the consultancy firm to ensure that the proper team is in place. And so that would take care of of having the right suitable and qualified consultants. In many cases, and I agree with Dr. Barbara, in many cases that I have seen, there are consultancy firms that with qualifications and experiences that do not match what the terms of reference is saying, and that's a clear sign to the regulator or to any other to a regulatory agency that the report is probably not going to be accurate or responsible is the word that we've been using. So I think, and so I hope you understand the connection between putting together in terms of a proper terms of reference with how it sort of match the design of the EIA firm, consultancy firm that's going to prepare the EIA report. All right. Do we have any other comments? No chats?
Mayor Paolo, it's Rachel here. Can
Hi,
I
Rachel, go ahead.
just quickly make a comment as well? Thank you. Look, I think I don't want to make things sound more complicated, but building on what you said, I'd say we are doing more and more complex projects in the Pacific. And I'm particularly talking about donor-funded things, but anything in the outer islands, for example, that any of us are doing, it's more complicated than doing things in main islands, and the issues will be different. So it's pretty unlikely these days that a single consultant will be enough because of the kinds of expertise that the projects that are ongoing need to be using. And if you appoint multiple individual consultants, please think about how they need to work together, because all of the issues, a classic division, for example, would be environment and a social consultant. But obviously they have to work together because issues around water or fishing or forestry can easily be environmental issues, they could be health issues, they can be social issues. So the consultants need to be able to work together, and it's really important to think about that from the beginning so that you put the right contractual arrangements in place. And this can be complicated and it can take a little bit of thinking, but I'd really urge you to think about that up front, because that will really help you get the good outcomes that you're looking for from the reporting and the preparation process, but also through to delivery, implementation and delivery, and the whole objective, meeting the objectives of your project in the first place. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. We've got comments from Amin Yassi from Fiji. It's a precautionary approach. If this is not carefully carried out, this can cause delay and variation to the project. So, okay, that's part of the terms of reference. Thank you, Amin Yassi. Any other comments from the floor? Okay, well, I don't see any more chat, and I think that's probably a good sign. Oh, we got a question from Keriko Leo. What about projects that does not require an EIA, but only requires a CEMP or Construction Environmental Management Plan? From my experience, Kele from Fiji Roads Authority, the approving authority does not give us in terms of reference for a CEMP or Construction Environmental Management Plan. So we, as the proponent, will have to formulate our very own CEMP. So this is from Fiji. Any takers on that question? Do we have anyone from Fiji, the Department of Fiji, joining in? Just curious. Perhaps you can provide us with an answer or a response. No? Did you say anyone? All right. Listen, we got nobody, but from okay. Hi, Nick. You go ahead.
Yeah. Look. This is a an argument I have internally in the bank, actually. I think any project that's going to have a potential environmental and social impact needs an assessment. How else do you know? You can write a CEMP to manage impacts, but what are the impacts you're trying to manage? So I don't see logically how you can just have a CEMP, which is just a collection of mitigation measures. What are you trying to mitigate? So even if it's I think you just take the principles in the SPREP EIA guidelines and you expand them and contract them based on the complexity of the project. And you go back to the principles of screening and scoping. You say, okay, we've only got 2 or 3 little tiny issues, just as I've done for a very small project in Kiribati, which is only really installing a bit of cable and a data center. You know, it's very small scale, but we're still prepared an environmental and social impact assessment. It's just 20 pages rather than 200 pages. So I think if there's civil works, it has to have an environmental assessment of some sort, and that environmental assessment includes a management plan.
Yeah.
So that's my view.
Thanks, Nick. Like I know in Samoa, there's 2 types of EIA. Just before I hand over, there's it's what they call preliminary environmental assessment report, which is a pair, and then there's a comprehensive environmental impact assessment report. And so the preliminary report is just sort of more of a screening, going through the screening checklist and see if there are sort of identify adverse impacts or just impacts that may not necessarily be adverse or significant. But the use of the pair is just as a first stage to see what they are. And if that is enough, if an EIA is not required, because that's what the pair is supposed to conclude, whether an EIA, a comprehensive EIA is required or not. If it's not, then it would just sort of have an EMP that's based on those risks that Nick alluded to. There has to be an assessment of impacts to guide a mitigation plan. You can't just, that is the connection. And if it's not, then there's a missing piece there. I'll go to Ratu Chope.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yes, thank you to our colleague Kelly from Fiji in raising that. And yes, the question raised is really a valid one. And I agree with you in some instances, some regulatory agency, they don't assist in the development of terms of reference of CMP. And again, it depends on the type of development. Once it's screened, and if it doesn't require an EIA, but what will be the question to us? What will be some other management tools to assist the regulatory agencies and partners in monitoring that particular development? That's why, in my experience, while working as a regulator, I always assist developers in guiding them on what should be a TOR or a CMP or EMP should be about, even though it doesn't need a full EIA, but still we need to guide them. So again, colleagues, it comes back to how we work together as a team and how we assist each other in protecting that environment and also promoting economic development. So that is my take, my contribution to that. And there can be lots of discussion around this, because in some countries this is not regulated. Again, it's a management or planning activity for the regulator and the applicant. Thank you.
I've got a question from Immaculata. Does the regulating agency decide which project needs an EIA? Greg, do you mind respond to that?
Sure, I did. I responded in the text to Joyce there, but yeah, happy to verbalize. Yes, it's the authority, the regulator, whoever the authority is that receives the development application, they screen it and determine whether or not an EIA is required for that project. So basically they look at it, work out whether or not there's likely to be significant impacts, or if it's an unknown type of project with new technologies that have never been done before on the island and they don't know how to manage it, then that would be another trigger for sending it through to an EIA. So yes, it's the regulator who decides whether it needs an EIA.
No, thanks,
Greg. That's the screening step.
I've got a comment from Kisa Cooper from in Samoa. Essential that the EIA consultant consults the regulating authority before starting at work, especially major projects. There may be updates to the requirements unknown to you, to the consultant, and also they can determine whether a preliminary environmental assessment report is required or a comprehensive environmental assessment report, cost and time saving. That's an excellent comment, Kisa. Yes, that's very good.
It's a great point.
Yeah, it's a very great point. The onus is on also developer to seek out the EIA regulating authority and ask questions. Sometimes they think that it's the EIA regulator coming in and there is their role, but I think as a best practice for every developer, please do consult the EIA regulatory approach. It saves a lot of time going back and forth if you don't.
Yeah, do it as early on as possible. Consult with the regulator. I mean, we're all people. We're the regulators, and I know most of the regulators across the Pacific, and Joppe and I work with them. They're good people. They don't want to make your life difficult. They want to know about your project. They want to help you do the right thing by your project. So consult with them early on. We've seen time and time again in some of the countries, the consultant tries to preempt what they think is going to happen, and they go and write their own TOR, or they produce an EIA without even submitting the development application. We've seen that happen in the Solomon Islands, unfortunately, for a mining application. And then it's had to all go back and start from scratch again. So yes, go and consult, as you said, go and consult with the regulator early on, and they'll tell you what type of EIA or what type of approval pathway you're most likely to need for your project.
Yeah, one common thing across the whole EIA process is consultation. It's consultation with the EIA regulators. It's the consultation with other government departments. It's a consultation with local communities and local stakeholders. That's a common thing in a very healthy, very effective EIA process, and it is meant to benefit the developer, the proponent. So consultation reveals a lot of things that you need to know to make sure that you do not have to come back and readjust and make changes, that you didn't plan for. Because like I said before, it costs money and too much time.
Yeah, if you get it wrong, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
So as Joppe said, consultation can save you money.
All right then. I'm looking at the chat box and I don't see any more comments. So, and I think in terms of time, we've come to the end of the allocated time. So I think I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Tomas.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm running out of words, forgive me, but thank you so much for your time. This has been excellent. How many people do we have? I'm just seeing if we broke the record. We've got 55 today. Sorry? So yesterday was 61. So we're shy by 6 people. So let me find maybe next week we'll find six more people to hop on. But I think 55 is an excellent, it's all right. It's really great. So I just really want to thank all of you for taking time available.
Hey, Joyce.
Having you here makes this more worthwhile and meaningful. And it gives us hope that the training topics that we're designing here for you, based on your comments, is exactly what you are asking for. You showing up tells us that's the case. So I want to thank you all for that. We will continue this webinar next week. We have module 11 and 12. So for next week, which is I think Wednesday and Thursday, the 27th of October, the 28th. So next week we have module 11. That's environmental and social management planning using the mitigation hierarchy and severity probability matrix for sustainable development in the Pacific. We'll have my team leader based in Sydney, Miss Rachel Marburg. She will lead that presentation, and hopefully others in the partnership will chime in. Module 12, straight after Thursday, we'll have module 12. That is how to carry out a stakeholder mapping for engagement planning, a case study in the Pacific. That will also be carried out by Miss Rachel Marburg from the World Bank and supported by Dr. Hilda Sakiti Wanga of the University of the South Pacific. So please do tune in tune in. We have some exciting presentations to show you. In the meantime, we will send out the evaluation for this module together with the module yesterday, and hopefully please do take time to complete that. And we will send out training certificates for those who have completed them. You have a comment, Greg?
Yeah, just one more thing, and I'm sure you're probably just about to get to it. I know there's probably some questions that people will come up with afterwards, and maybe we didn't quite address the question that you had. If you want to continue the conversation, log into the PNEA website onto the Talanoa and put it in there, and Ivan, Joppe, and myself will help to address it, and as well as everybody else. Let's continue the conversation in the Talanoa on PNEA. And if you're not a member of the PNEA yet, please register.
Yes, please register. Good segue from my final point, which is all the presentations will be uploaded on the PNEA. We have also the video recordings. Our SPREP IT comms folks are tidying it up, and they will upload it on YouTube. And Ivan, who manages the PNEA, or the key person here, he will notify you through the PNEA email list of the link, so you can go into it and click on it. So you get the PowerPoint presentations and the YouTube links. But if you're having problems, please do feel free to email me, Ivan, Joppe, Rachel, and others, Greg, and we'll be happy to help you do that. But please join the PNEA. That's where everything is happening. Okay, that's it from me. Do you have a final comment? No, thank you. I want to thank you all for coming. Please join us next week. Thank you so much for your participation, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
You take care. Look after yourselves. Till next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
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 Can you put chat safe? Naka, thank you.
Thanks.